You've heard their name in stories, Sunday school classes, and from the pulpit. And now it's time to vote to see who is Poplar Springs' favorite Bible character. Hey, everybody. All right, so it is Wednesday, which means it is time for another round of matches. So before we get into the next bracket we're talking about the winners from the last rounds you guys voted for, a couple of close matches in there. So moving on to the next round is Paul, Jacob, Job, Joshua, Solomon, Peter, Rebecca, and Luke. A couple close ones in there. So if you want to make sure yours gets to the second round, make sure you vote. Make sure you fill out all the votes. That way I know it's just not somebody going in there trying to stack the votes to one person. Make sure you have a bunch of votes in there. It'll be fun. But we do have an interesting second bracket for you guys. We're calling this bracket B. And this is the Mary bracket. So as we dive in, let's see who the first matchup is. Mary versus Absalom. All right, so coming in at the number 1 seed for this bracket is Mary, mother of Jesus. All right, so interesting fact. The statistics that I have Mary as being the only character in the first round of 64 characters who gets 100% to get to the next round. So if you're a fan of Mary, you want to keep that statistic up, make sure you go vote for her. But we all know Mary, mother of Jesus. You can find all of her stuff in the gospel if you want to go read up on it. Excellent character to be ranked number 1 and the highest ranked lady in the tournament. So keep that in mind. Okay. Next we have Absalom. And so this is the third son of David, I believe it is. Let's see here what I got right now. You'll find he starts to pop up around 2 Samuel. He is considered to be the most handsome man in the kingdom. Eventually, he does rebel against his father. Kind of comes to a terrible end when he's running from a battle and his luxurious hair gets caught in a tree and he gets stuck hanging in a tree, and that's how they catch him. And eventually, he would die from being caught up in a tree, and the enemy army catched him. So go take a look at those two, see what you think. Who do you think deserves to go to the next round? I don't see an upset in this round, but you could surprise me. All right, here we go. James versus Ruth. All right, moving on. We go to the number 8 versus number 9 seed. And this is coming in at number 8, James, writer of the book of James, the half-brother of Jesus. He called James the Just. His biggest thing when writing his books, he talks about patience and perseverance when going through trials and tribulations. So it's an interesting read. Go read up on his books. I think you would enjoy reading James. I think he's got a tough one in this round, even though he is the 8th seed and he is the half-brother of Jesus. He does have to come in against the number 9 seed, which is Ruth. Ruth is coming in here, obviously, from the book of Ruth. So you got 2 authors of their own respective books coming in. And Ruth has a very interesting story to her. For those of you who already know, Ruth is a pretty strong woman for what it's worth. But she loses her father-in-law and her husband. And she decides she's going to stay with Naomi, her mother-in-law. And eventually things work out for him. She takes care of her. She is going to marry Boaz. We talked about him in the last bracket. And just a strong-willed woman. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Ruth, if she can get through the second round, may have to come against Mary, and then we'll have a lady showdown in the second round. So that should be pretty neat. But go take a look at James and Ruth and see which one you think should go to the next round. Thomas versus Ezekiel. All right, here we go. Coming in the number 5 spot, which I kind of find interesting that this one character's at the 5 spot, but middle of the pack, I guess. But we'll see. That's a top 20 character out of the 64. But this is Doubting Thomas. So Thomas is coming in, and you'll find a lot of his stuff in the book of John, the Gospel of John. So, of course, he is one of the disciples, and he's best known for being Doubting Thomas and not actually believing that Jesus is alive. And everybody's talking about he's come back from the dead. He says, when I can put my hand in his wounds. And Jesus shows up, he's like, boom. And Thomas believes when he can see it. And that's when we get the great quote of, Thomas, you have seen and believed, but blessed are those who can't see or didn't see and believe. So that's an interesting thing to look up about Thomas. But he does have a tough one coming in with Ezekiel. So we got Ezekiel coming in at the number 12 spot, which I think Ezekiel should have been a little bit higher, but I'm not the one who made the list. I just went with the list that I found and kind of agree with most of them. So Ezekiel comes in, the book of Ezekiel, prophet. He was real big on the exile when the Israelites were sent to Babylon, and he's most famous for the vision of the chariot. So go read that up. I think he's pretty interesting of a character to read to see. He's the prophet that kind of starts the whole, if you look at the Old Testament, of when they finally got pulled out of Babylon and people had to start talking about what does God really have planned for the Israelites and all this negative stuff's going on. So Doubting Thomas, Ezekiel, go take a look at him. Tell me what you think. Rachel versus Cain. Next, coming in at the 4 spot. So we got the 4 spot. We've got Rachel, who is going up against Cain. Now, for those of you who don't know Rachel, that is Jacob's second wife, the youngest sister in the story. If you remember, Jacob falls in love with Rachel, works for 7 years, goes to earn Rachel, and then goes to marry her, and then Dad pulled a swap, and I think it was Leah was the older sister's name, and Leah was the one that he eventually married because she had the veil on, couldn't see, and then of course Jacob's upset, so he works for another 7 years so he could marry Rachel. So go take a look, see what you think about Rachel. Rachel is the mother of Joseph and Benjamin. Okay, so you know she has kind of some importance there. Let's see here. A neat story that I read up on, I got in my notes, is when they decide to flee from her father, they steal the idols. I'm guessing they're pretty expensive or something that's worth a lot. And they decide that they're going to look for the idols. And Jacob said, whoever has these idols, may a curse be put upon them because I don't have them. And it was Rachel who took them. I don't know why she took, she maybe took them because it could be worth some money on down the road or something. I don't know. But she sits on the idols and tells them that it's, she can't stand up and that she apologizes for it. And then eventually they find out, or Jacob finds out she has them, and something bad happens to her because a curse is put on whoever had them. But I go read that story and find out the reason why she couldn't stand up. It's a very interesting story on that one. But then we got Cain. Cain comes in at the 13th spot, and Cain and Abel, not a cheerful guy in the slightest. Remember, Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Eve, and Cain was the farmer brother. Abel was the shepherd brother. And of course, they start making sacrifices to God. God doesn't like Cain, likes Abel. Cain gets super upset and then murders his brother. And then, story goes on and on. But, that's kind of what you're dealing with when you hear about Cain and Abel, I guess. So you kind of got to decide who's going to get to the next round. The story of Rachel, who is the second wife who stole stuff but didn't steal stuff. So I guess she's a liar. I don't know how you look at it, but maybe she did it for a good reason. I don't know. But then you got Cain, who murdered his brother because he was jealous of the offering. So go take a look. Tell me what you think. Vote for who goes to the next round. Samuel versus Judas. Next, we have in the 6th seed. Now, I think this one should have been higher. This is Samuel. Samuel's coming in at 6. And when you look at the other 2 brackets that we have when we finish up the 64, you can tell me what you think later in the comment section, or shoot me a message if you think it's different. But Samuel comes in at 6, and book of Samuel, real big prophet for the transition from the judges to the kings. And everyone's like, we want a king. And he's like, you don't want one. Give us a king. All right, fine. And so God uses Samuel to find Saul, not Paul, Saul, Old Testament. Finds Saul, who Saul eventually goes crazy, but eventually he does come across David, and David goes through who he goes through when he becomes king. So Samuel, super important to the story of getting to the lineage of David, and David taking the throne. So take a look at Samuel, see where he thinks, and I don't think he's going to have a problem in the first round because Judas comes in at 11. 11. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. He comes in. Maybe it's because of how important he is, because he had to betray Jesus for the whole story to work out. But he comes in at the 11th spot. He's the disciple that betrayed Jesus in there. Not going to get too much into it because I'm sure you know all about Judas. Go see what you think in comparison. I don't think Samuel's going to have an issue in this one, but you could prove me wrong. All right? All right. Elijah versus Elisha. This one is a fun matchup. One, I like where he's in. The other one, okay, I'll go with it. But it's interesting because you got teacher versus the student. It's pretty cool. So, and coming in the 3 spot is Elijah with the J. Okay, so Elijah comes in. So you'll find a lot of his stuff in 1 Kings, or in Kings, but in 1 Kings. he's the big prophet that came in and had that challenge against Baal's or priest, and they made the altar, and they all started screaming and praying to Baal and cutting themselves, saying, "Hey, won't you come set this thing on fire?" And nothing happens. And some of the stories I've read about him, Elijah kind of is making fun of him the whole time. So he's like, "Won't you pray harder? I don't think he can hear you," you know. And so eventually, you know, he tells him to douse it with water, and then you know, praise to God, and the fire comes and consumes all the wood, even the water is evaporated up. So, you know, he has that big story in there, and there's other things about him, but, you know, Elijah, big name, but then he's going up against his student, or his protege, if you'd say. At the 14th spot is Elisha, S-H, Elisha. So Elisha, he does a lot of miracles. They call him the wonder worker. And if you go and look at all the miracles or wonders that God does through him, a lot of them compared to Jesus. He feeds a lot of people, raises people from the dead, a lot of stuff like that. I think the water was bad in Jericho, and they say he came in and purified the water. So interesting stuff. So go take a look and see, who do you think gets to go to the next round? Is it the teacher or the student? So Elijah versus Elisha. Should be interesting stuff. Joseph versus Isaiah. Next, we're at the 7 and 10 seed. So coming in at 7 is Joseph. And we're talking about the Joseph from the Old Testament. This is Joseph and his bright, colorful coat. Joseph is a fun character. He goes through a lot of stuff. He is the favorite son who gets sold into slavery and eventually makes himself out to be, or makes his way out to be, the second most important person in Egypt when the famine was coming through. But I highly recommend you take the time to read up on Joseph. If you don't know all the stuff that went on with him, I'm sure you know a lot of stuff about Joseph, and you'll enjoy reading up and seeing what all happened with him. But that's a fun story to go and read. But coming in at 10, I disagree with this one also. Just because I think of how important this character is to what Jesus is going to do, and he's in the Old Testament. So this is coming in at 10. This is Isaiah. I think Isaiah should have been a little bit higher. I can handle 10, but, you know, at least a top 8 in whatever bracket he's supposed to be in. And, you know, the prophet Isaiah is super important because there's a lot of, in his scripture, the foreshadowing of what was going to happen with Jesus and what they're looking for when he comes around. So read through Isaiah. It's a pretty long read, so if you want to go to the internet and Google it and see all the highlights of what's going on. I think this is going to be a tough match, though, for Isaiah to get through to the next round, because Joseph is a pretty likable character, and a lot of people enjoyed reading about it. You have a lot of children's story to go along with Joseph. But let's say you could prove me wrong. It could be Isaiah going to the next round, because I think he should be ranked higher. So we'll see. John the Baptist versus Ananias. And finally, we are at 2 versus 15. And this is a fun character to bring up. This is John the Baptist. Okay, so this is the crazy camel wearing guy that lives out in the woods and eats the bugs and honey and stuff like that. But, you know, Jesus' cousin, who he is proclaimed to prepare the way for Jesus to come in. Eventually, he's going to baptize Jesus. A lot of cool stuff. His death comes kind of brutal at the end of the story. But, you know, go through, read up on John the Baptist and see what you think of him, because he's coming up against Ananias. Now, a lot of you are probably familiar with the name. If you're not familiar with the name, that's fine. You can go look it up. That's the great thing about these tournament brackets, is you go and see what all these people did. And Ananias is super important in the book of Acts to a little character named Paul. You probably heard of him. I don't know. Maybe last bracket he was in there. But the neat thing about Ananias is he's the one that Saul, before he became Paul, Saul is sent to be healed of his blindness. So Ananias is just one of those characters, you know, you hear about, just kind of like, he had to do what? Like, could you imagine if God said the guy who's murdered Christians is going to come to your house and you're going to pray for him, and you're like, excuse me? Yeah, this is Ananias. So he may have a tough one with John the Baptist, because he's another one of those fun characters to talk about. It has a pretty deep story in there, but you go take a look. Tell me what you think. Who deserves to go to the next round, John the Baptist or Ananias? Interesting to see. All right, so that's all I have for you for this round. Okay, it's a little bit shorter video because you kind of know how it's going. We're going to have the voting up till Friday afternoon, sometime around Friday afternoon. We'll say 5 o'clock-ish. I'm going to cut it off, and then we'll see what happens in the next round. Saturday, we have time to post the next one. Then Sunday, we'll go to the C bracket. And I'm going to tell you who's in the C bracket. Just tell you, there's some interesting matchups coming up, some very popular characters you might like. But go through bracket B today. It is online now. You can see the link in the description section, or it could be floating around somewhere. Click it, go vote. let me know. We're through the first round, and so far, had an upset. And we also had our number one seed is still in there. So let's see if Mary can hang on to this bracket and keep going. So until next time, happy voting. Good luck. Hope the character makes it to the next one.